Well, chances are if you haven't had one, you know someone who has. We're talking about landlords who don't meet the standards of their renters.
And we posed the question on our Facebook page. Here are some of the stories that you shared about some of your former landlords. Heather from Albert Lee writes, there were mushrooms growing in the house and the basement was covered in mold.
And Anna from Goodell says our water would always get shut off because he didn't pay the bill.
Lisa from Mason City writes, when I moved into the house had dog and cat feces in all rooms. Refrigerator was full of mold and the house was a complete mess.
And finally, Kendra from Mason City says, I had a landlord once who thought painting over a bad leak would make it go away.
And it does not,
no.
For the record. Those are just a few of the dozens of responses that we received about less than perfect landlords. But every story has two sides, and we are finding out that landlords often have to deal with some very troublesome tenants.
KIMT News 3's Raquel Hellman has more from Studio 3 in a Covering Community special report.
Landlord horror stories. That's the theme of a recent meeting of the Iowa Landlords Association in Des Moines. During this meeting, landlords from across the state shared some of their worst experiences in the business. Here's the tale of what one landlord found when he went to go collect late rent from a tenant.
I could see the piles of dog doo-doo and with a mysterious cloud of steam rolling out of the kitchen. As I rounded the corner into the kitchen, I found a mound of ice. Any water which did not freeze was draining through a cold air return in the floor onto the furnace below. And the stench in the room, well, it was hard to even breathe in the room.
And while situations like that aren't common, they do happen. But there are ways landlords can protect themselves. Now, a local landlord shares his story.
I've been renting properties in Mason City since January of 1973.
For nearly 40 years, Russ Hardy has been a landlord. In that time, he's seen it all.
Wonderful tenant, would give him an excellent reference. When they turned their key in, it was immaculate in here.
But that is not always the case.
Apparently she didn't have the means to get all of her things moved and left it in this condition.
And this condition is extreme.
There's cereal on the floor. I think she had a pet, and there was some pet feces in one room.
It really would be considered.
Russ says what we're looking at here is rare. From a dirty mattress on the floor, scribblings on the walls, and even food still in some dishes in the sink. But he knows how to protect himself, and that includes regularly performing background checks on all potential tenants.
We check Iowa courts online. We check their total income to confirm that they can afford a place.
Even taking those precautions, there's always the chance a troublesome tenant slips through the cracks. When that happens, many may wonder why a landlord doesn't just evict the person living in their property. It turns out the process isn't that simple.
Most landlords, if they have trouble with their tenant, they'll give them a 3-day notice, which is in the statutes.
That's just the first of several steps landlords are required by law to take to remove an unruly renter.
And then if they're not out in 3 days, then they have to file another paper with the courts to get them into a court hearing.
It's up to the court to decide what happens next.
That judge will determine whether who's got the most preponderance of evidence on determining whether the landlord has a right to evict the tenant.
Depending on that decision, law enforcement may get involved. Keeping in mind the process is set up to also protect tenants from possible problems like discrimination.
And then we have the lawful authority to remove the person from the property.
Sheriff Pals doesn't see a lot of these extreme scenarios, but he insists a working relationship between deputies and landlords is essential in keeping the community safe.
Usually when law enforcement gets involved, either crimes happen or suspected of happening, and we'll just call them up and say, hey, you need to watch this one, maybe there's some illegal activity going on.
And while this property isn't a crime scene, it's almost just as scary for the guy responsible for getting it back to rentable condition. The next step, cleaning this place up, a process Russ says will cost hundreds of dollars.
To bring a dumpster, and with a dumpster we'll clean things out, repair walls, repaint.
With both time and money lost along the way, there's also some hope for the next occupant.
It's going to take a long time. 6 months to just get back what we spend on it to get it ready to rent.
As with most experiences, there's valuable lessons learned. Here's the conclusion to the horror story we showed you earlier.
I would have checked their background a lot better. I might have been able to stop them before they ever took possession. And I would have filed a small claim for back rent so that you folks would know what kind of folks you were dealing with.
And despite these negative experiences, the landlords I spoke with tell me most of the time it's a good industry to be in. Sarah?
All right, thank you, Raquel. Whether you're the landlord or the renter, if you're having problems with the other party, there are places you can turn. The Cerro Gordo County Sheriff's Office recommends contacting an attorney or your local Human Rights Commission.